What an absurd plot this is. The male protagonist simply expressed his apologies to the gods. Immediately the gods bestowed numerous blessings upon the male protagonist. You should know this other world is not simple. Here the highest attribute value for the strongest is only 5. Yet our male protagonist actually broke this norm. He not only reached the limit in all attributes, he even received blessings from 7 gods. This was all thanks to the male protagonist's bravery in his previous life. In his previous life he acted heroically and saved 2 elderly women from a knife-wielding robber. To earn a smile from a beautiful woman, the male protagonist acted decisively. He jumped out without hesitation. He used his body to block the attack from the robber. Unexpectedly, the result was that he collided with the robber's knife. As a result, the male protagonist did not send the robber to 911. Instead, he was sent to another world himself. After being reincarnated in the other world, his first reaction was to quickly check if he was missing anything, because at this moment he was just a 2.5-year-old child. This action left those around him astonished. The maid felt both excited and a bit scared. She even thought the male protagonist had wet his pants. Saying this, she yanked down the male protagonist's pants, because if he really had, it would need to be cleaned. Seeing the maid's bold action, the male protagonist was stunned. The male protagonist was completely unprepared. Fortunately, this awkwardness did not last long. It turned out he was reincarnated into a noble family, and his father was indeed very fortunate. Not only did he marry 2 wives, he even had 2 older brothers. This meant he would have no chance at the family inheritance. However, the male protagonist did not care about this. What he cared about more was that magic actually existed in this other world. After 2.5 weeks of study, he finally could understand the writing of this other world. Next, he began to attempt to learn magic. It was indeed a coincidence. He actually succeeded on his first attempt at learning. He remembered that his mother once told him, magic isn't something that can be learned overnight. This was a real slap in the face coming so quickly. The male protagonist decided to try again. This time he decided to control his magical power. After all, it wouldn't be good to be discovered. Unexpectedly, the flames he casually released were like a pillar reaching the sky, instantly making it hard for him to control. In a panic, he had no choice but to aim outside the window. But due to the sheer force, it still caught the maid's attention. Clearly, this maid was incredibly smart. She managed to get through with just a few words. But her sister was not so easily fooled, because she had studied this book before. Upon hearing this, the male protagonist instantly felt something was off.
知ってるよ、カインくんが僕がこっそり外の世界勉強しているの。私が教えてあげようか。
Fortunately, this sister was rather foolish. Time flew by. In the blink of an eye, the male protagonist was already 5 years old. And today was the day he would undergo his baptism. As long as he passed the baptism, he could use magic openly and without shame. The so-called baptism is a prayer to the gods, to gain their protection, to help the male protagonist understand better. The sister unhesitatingly showed her attribute panel. At first glance, the first few attributes seemed normal enough, but until the male protagonist discovered that the sister's attribute panel boldly stated favorite, Cain. Ha ha ha. I never would have expected that the sister was actually from the Earthhole tribe. Then they arrived at Marin Vandu. Those who were unaware thought the male protagonist was going to attack the Navy headquarters. The one who baptized the male protagonist was surprisingly a main character. It turned out that the baptism was like a coming-of-age ceremony. The male protagonist must pray to the gods to pray for his safety until the age of 5. This was a standard procedure. But for the male protagonist, it was anything but ordinary. Only because after the archbishop finished reading the Bible, the male protagonist heard bursts of laughter. Suddenly a flash of light occurred. The male protagonist unexpectedly found himself in the realm of the gods. 7 gods suddenly appeared before him. This scene left the male protagonist stunned. He had never heard of the baptism requiring a trip to heaven. The elder on the throne was the creator god. Beside him was the god who governs reincarnation. Then the god of reincarnation informed the male protagonist that his death was actually not part of the causal chain. It turned out that the male protagonist's previous heroism was simply unnecessary. After all, according to the rules, the robber would have fallen too, and then be restrained by those around him. In other words, he died in vain. You must understand. At that time he had mustered up all his courage. Yet the outcome was like this. Not only that, the robber was charged with murder for harming the male protagonist. This was simply laughable. However, the male protagonist ultimately died due to his good deeds. Therefore, the gods on Earth commissioned them to reincarnate the male protagonist into this world. Due to the consciousness of an adult, it was difficult to accept the experiences of infancy. The gods had no choice but to seal the male protagonist's memories. However, unexpectedly, when the male protagonist was 2.5, the seal accidentally broke. The male protagonist was very grateful to several gods for this. It was precisely because he retained the memories of his past life that allowed him to quickly learn the writing of this other world. The 7 gods saw the little kid being so sensible, so things became chaotic. The 7 gods vied to make the male protagonist their godson. Moreover, they also granted him a multitude of various blessings. Each god corresponded to different abilities, but time was running out. Thus the gods could not introduce them in detail. Thus, amidst the elders' silly laughter, the male protagonist was sent back to the church once more. The light from the statue then faded away. This filled the male protagonist's father with curiosity. He was curious about just how powerful his son was. Even the male protagonist was not clear about this, so he feigned a stomachache and went outside. Regarding the blessings from the gods, the male protagonist felt a bit anxious. He immediately opened his attribute panel. Attribute panel. But to his surprise, all his attribute values were actually 10.
体術アイテムボックス10創造神の加護10生命神の加護10魔法神の加護10大地神の加護10武神の加護10技能神の加護10商業神の加護10一体神様たち何やってるの
You should know. The highest attribute value in this world is only 5. When the male protagonist felt despair over being exposed, the creator god sent him a message. It turned out he forgot to tell the male protagonist. Creation magic can modify attribute values. Unexpectedly, this old man had considered this so thoroughly. So the male protagonist immediately used creation magic. He modified those exaggerated attribute values. Awaiting the light to pass, the male protagonist returned to the table. To celebrate his 5th birthday, his family held a birthday party for him. But the father was still worried about the male protagonist's blessings. The male protagonist, after modifying his attributes, also displayed his panel. However, I never would have expected. It was impossible to guard against. The male protagonist still overlooked one detail. In addition to having the blessings of 7 gods, the male protagonist's magical power was astonishingly high. He could almost be called a walking spring. In this world, the strongest mage's magical power is only about 10,000. And the male protagonist was only 5 years old. His magical power actually reached 30,000. Clearly such magical power would attract the attention of the nation. To protect his son's safety, the father sternly reminded those present. They must not speak of what they witnessed today. After all this was over, the male protagonist hurried back to his room. Although he knew nothing about average ability values, the summoning magic book before him left the male protagonist unable to let it go for a long time. After all, if he could summon a cute animal, then opening a harem in another world would be easy. Just thinking about that, the male protagonist couldn't wait to rush out of the room to start learning summoning magic. However, unexpectedly, an unexpected thing happened. The male protagonist actually summoned a giant minotaur. Moreover, he didn't have a single hair on him. This was indeed a contrast. He clearly wanted a fluffy little animal. However, just at that moment, the sister and a beast-eared girl happened to pass by. The male protagonist didn't waste any words. He directly stood before the 2 women. This scene reminded him of his past life. But in a moment of danger, he had no time to think further. Since he had not yet undergone systematic training, the male protagonist was even captured before he could touch the minotaur. The sister's shout seemed to trigger him. It awakened the male protagonist's potential. This time he decided to give it his all. In just an instant, the minotaur came quickly and left just as fast. As his magical power was consumed, the male protagonist also fell down. Seeing this, the 2 women immediately ran to the male protagonist. In the moment when his consciousness was fading, fluffy ears appeared before his eyes. They also appeared right in front of him. Overall, he could be considered to have summoned a fluffy animal. He thought the male protagonist would be in great pain. However, things did not go as expected. The male protagonist was completely unharmed. This was thanks to the blessings of the 7 gods. However, the creator god felt this was not enough.
あやつが16歳になるまでに国一番、いや大陸一の強さになっていないと困る。カインの力が必要になる時がきっと来るからな。